Before we begin today's episode, we want to share a quick listener note that this episode does contain material that is not suitable for all ages. There will be descriptions of suicide, violence, and paranormal activity, so listener discretion is advised. Melody had spent all the morning trying to charge up our battery packs for our microphones. The minute we walked in here, she said they were drained of battery. And you said, well, that's nothing new,
Yeah,
right?
Spirits are made out of pure energy, and the energy in the house, anything that is electronic will be interrupted at times by the spirits.
Welcome to the Art of Custom from Hibbs Homes. Sponsored by Pella Window and Doors and Ferguson Bath Kitchen and Lighting Gallery.
It was a famously muggy St. Louis summer evening in June 1985. Patty Pointer and two waiters were seated at the bar after the last diners of the evening had left the Lemp Mansion and restaurant. They were chatting and decompressing when their conversation was stopped. All three felt a faint breeze and chills prickled up their spines. On impulse, they turned to see who had just walked behind them and saw that no one was there. This incident took place 5 years after Life magazine included the mansion on their list of America's 9 most haunted homes in America. And in the almost 40 years since that article put the mansion on some of the most eerie maps, the Lemp Mansion in the city of St. Louis has appeared on National Geographic, CNN Travels, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, and more.
I've got chills, and we haven't even started the podcast. That disclaimer alone at the very top was so unusual because you and I are usually laughing and joking, and then we get into a serious mode when we're talking about new construction builds and custom homes and all. But we really did want to do something fun because this is the Halloween season, and it's a really cool old mansion 30 minutes from our offices in the St. Louis area. You had a great idea to go down there and tape this podcast. Why did you come up with it?
It's about a house. It's a story about a house.
Yeah, but it's a scary house.
It is, but it's absolutely beautiful.
It
Just
is.
The ornate construction, you know, all the carvings, and as spooky as it is, people do go there to get married. And one of my good friends actually was married there. So, you know, it's
very famous in this area.
It really is.
And I can almost imagine back to the June of 1985 when Patty Pointer and those waiters were there. You know, you feel this breeze, you turn around and nobody's there. But that happens all the time.
And that's why all of those, you know, paranormal hunters will show up at this mansion. Yeah. And you do a Google on St. Louis, you do a Google on haunted houses, and it shows up quite a bit. So,
it does.
But the Pointers didn't really know that whenever they purchased it. So,
do you really notice things like that, though, until you really live there and get to know it?
I was reading a really interesting article the other day about the disclosures that you need to make. There are certain periods of time, you know, like with these famous haunted houses and, you know, the Amityville house. People still live in that Amityville horror house. So I don't know. It's just kind of cool that, you know, when so much time has passed, too. I mean, it was a boarding house before the Pointers purchased it as well. So.
And even when we were down in the Lemp Mansion, there was one particular incident that kind of spooked me a little bit because of a noise that was made while we were doing the interview. I love how you set up our guest. You said she is one of the most sensational souls associated with the Lemp Mansion. She was just such a treat to spend time with, and she's been there for a couple of decades now, guiding tours through this haunted mansion, and she just has a blast with it.
She was wonderful to hang out with, and I can't wait for our listeners to hear.
Betsy, it is such a pleasure to be here at the Lemp Mansion. Obviously, being a St. Louisan, know a lot about it. Scared to be here. And I've already walked in, and you're talking about suicides, you're talking about Halloween, you're talking about This is the perfect time of year it has to be to visit the Lemp Mansion, right?
Yes, it is. Although a lot of people think that the Lemp Mansion is only haunted in October.
Oh, no.
But it's haunted all the time. So
and don't you host events year-round, too?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do a lot of events, from weddings out in the outside, beautiful gazebo out there, to, well, like this month we're having the Halloween Bash, which is one of the biggest Halloween parties in the country.
I can only
imagine. You know, it's 1,000 people sometimes, 3 bands and food and drink, It's so much fun.
So the actual building, the house, the mansion that we're in was actually built in 1868.
Yes.
Talk about the history, a little bit about why it was built and how it helped kind of build up this neighborhood, if you will.
Yeah, it sure did. Although it was a pretty affluent neighborhood when they started, because there was a lot of wealthy people. In fact, it was called Millionaire's Hill when Adam Lemp's son, who was William Jacob Lemp, built this house.
And we're just south of the city of St. Louis.
We are, but that was the country back then almost, you know.
Yes.
Although it was still starting to be built up by then. When Adam Lemp, who was a patriarch of the family, came in the 1830s, he had a grocery business, but he wanted to have a brewery. Because that's what he had done in Germany. He was a brewmeister. Okay. And so eventually he closed the business, opened up a brewery about where the Gateway Arch is, actually.
Oh.
Yes, it was called the Western Brewing Company. Well, then that got too small for them because they were just so popular, their beers were, because he had introduced something called German lager beer. Mm-hmm. Now, a lager beer is like what Budweiser is, or that effervescent amber beers that we all know and love. And so he introduced that, got so popular, pouring money in and so forth, so they decided to look for a bigger space. That's how this part of the city came to be. It was an immense place, and there was a cave system underneath it to store the big lagering tanks, which you have to keep cold. Mm-hmm. Well, Adam Lemp had died, so his son William had taken over. William Jacob Lemp. He changed the name of the brewery right away, and now it's the William J. Lemp Brewery Company. Started this expansion that lasted till he died in 1904. Okay. And so now that's what we see down the street from us here. And then this house, was, as you said, was built in 1868 to house his family and so forth.
So I'm going to back up just a little bit because I introduced you as Betsy, but you have a beautiful last name. And I wouldn't do it justice by pronouncing it. So your last name is?
Well, my last name in the Americas and in the United States is Burnett-Belanger.
Right.
But if you,
that's boring.
But that's boring. So if you say Burnett-Belanger, that is lovely.
And you said you had a love affair with this the building ever since you can remember.
Yes, I did.
What was it about the mansion?
Oh, it scared the daylights out of me. I would go by here and it would be spooky. And, you know, I was born in 1949, so I was too young to do it then. Right. But after a few years, you know, I'd go by here for different things, or we'd go. Now, the Highway 55, which is right outside our door here, was built in 1960. So we would go up there and I'd see that building and I just got to know more. Then in the 70s, after the Pointers, who own the house now, purchased the house and they wanted an elegant restaurant, but eventually they wanted to have a bed and breakfast in and everything, and they've succeeded in all of that. But in the beginning, they had a cool little cozy restaurant in the basement. It was called the Raskeller. And then when I could drink, then I was in there going for a happy hour or something, and I wanted to go upstairs. First opportunity I had, I was up here, you know, talking to the bartender, who is one of the Pointer brothers, and just exploring as much as I could. Then I got a call, and they asked me to be a tour guide. Oh. And it was a kind of a funny tour guide because I dressed as a kind of a German maid, not a little maid, but a maid.
You gave me your accent a minute ago.
I did. I said, my name is Bertha Buxtehude. Come on into the Lemp Mansion. We go on a tour, you know. And that's not German accent at all, but it worked, you know. I did that for a couple years, and then it was so hard because so many people love their chicken dinner. It's an all-you-can-eat chicken dinner and roast beef and ham. And
that's on Sundays?
That's on Sundays, every Sunday for the last 45 years.
That's kind of why we're here. A couple of reasons. First of all, we have a podcast called The Art of Custom. We're custom home builders, but you know what? Secret between us, I really love old homes because my wife and I got started in this business by renovating old homes in South St. Louis over on Juniata. We took an old 4-family flat, turned it into a single-family home, and we did some projects over in a couple of other areas of the downtown St. Louis area. We absolutely loved working in this community. And so we got into new construction, but you don't see homes made the way they're made today. So I'm going to be looking at some of the architecture as we walk around here and kind of, you know, geeking out on that. But I'm standing in, this was an office, right? We've come in the front door, and this is immediately to the left, and this is an office. And the first thing you told me was, this is where one of 4 suicides took place in the mansion area? 3 inside and 1 outside?
One in a different home.
In a different home. Okay, you need to start telling me this because
Yeah.
it is Halloween season after all.
Yes,
so
it
this
is.
is the time to start spilling the goods.
Yeah, spilling the goods. In 1904, Billy became president of the brewery. And he was president of the brewery, and things were looming in the forefront that he knew that Prohibition was going to be a fact and so forth. So he took that personally. He said, the government's out to get me. And this was his office. He suffered a lot from a lot of illnesses, and he was hospitalized a lot. So on the morning of his suicide, he had in June of that same year, 1922, he had auctioned off the brewery complex, and he took such a loss in it. The brewery complex at that time was worth about $7 to $10 million.
That's a lot back
That's
in
a
the
lot
day.
of money,
Yeah.
and he sold it for $588,000. I think that's probably what destroyed him eventually. I mean, he had already suffered a lot of pain and losses of it, both of his parents, and his sister had supposedly committed suicide in 1920. He was probably pretty much depressed over the whole everything that was going on for him. So on the morning of his suicide, he came in here. He had a conversation with his secretary, and then a phone conversation with his second wife. His first wife was Lillian Handlin, and she's also known as the Lavender Lady. And his second wife was an older woman by the name of Ellie Kohler. And she had known Billy since he was a little boy. They probably had a pretty good marriage, kind of a stabilizing marriage for him. But then after that conversation, he pulled his chair over to the fireplace. He opened up his vest and his shirt, and he shot himself in the heart. It was such a violent shot, though, that it threw him to the floor. So when everybody rushed in here, he was already gone. There wasn't a note, although it wasn't unexpected.
Right.
He had been suffering quite a bit.
Melody, it's interesting because the office is now a dining room for bed and breakfast and chicken dinner guests, and it still has the original beautiful Italian marble mantle that was uncovered when Richard and Patty Pointer purchased the renovated home all the way back in 1975.
Right. And, Betsy's going to tell us a little bit about how it was a boarding house between the time when the Lemps owned it and when the Pointers purchased it. She calls it a sad period, a dark period in the home's history. She's so connected to this house. It's
She
so
is,
cool.
yeah.
What I think is really interesting is I was going through the audio files, though, and there was actually a whole discussion that we had before we went from the office into the parlor. And I made the joke. It was the story of Charles Lemp.
Yeah.
And I made the joke because we kept unplugging on accident. I was like, he doesn't want us to tell his story. As I got back to pull the audio files, that is the one that was completely missing and I could not rebuild.
Completely missing, but the other audio files are just fine, and they sound great. But if you also remember when we walked in there, you had purposefully charged the recording device overnight, and we're not making this up. I promise you we're not. But when you walked into the mansion, the battery was drained.
Right, and I had to run out to my car and plug it into the wall.
Yeah, we had to, and from room to room, we had to literally plug it into the electrical outlet. So, a couple spooky things happened. Again, coincidence? I don't know, but it's just kind of eerie, and it kind of adds fuel to our fire, if you will.
Well, and now we get to go into the parlor with Betsy. And in this parlor, there are 2 beautiful carved mantles that are African mahogany.
They're gorgeous.
Yeah, and she talks about how while during the period where it was a boarding house, it was, they bought it and it was covered in years and years of paint. And just every time they stripped a layer away, something new emerged from the history of this house. And at the top, there was a hand-painted mural.
It was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, so another kind of creepy story. The guy who came in to restore this mural, his name was Claude Breckwalt. And he'd worked in several homes in the St. Louis area painting these big murals. And, the Pointers bring him in to refresh what was actually covered in canvas because the Lemps did not like how the mural turned out. So he's laying on the scaffolding, doing the whole thing, restoring, and he knew nothing about the history of this home because keep in mind, it wasn't until 1980 when people really knew what was going on there. And he said he had this feeling that someone was standing out in the hallway watching him. He kind of dismissed it, and then it just got so intense that he just felt the urge to get out of there. And so did not clean his brushes, did not do anything with his equipment, ran out, didn't even lock the door behind himself, and told the Pointers, think you might have a ghost problem, guys. But Betsy, we sat down in the parlor with Betsy, and that's where you had your kind of spooky encounter.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll let Betsy tell you a little bit more about the parlor.
Now, this one we see now was put in 1950, and that was after the Lemps were gone.
Right.
And it was put in because it was a boarding house. It turned into a boarding house. Kind of a sad era for them. And it was over 20 years that it was a boarding house. So things suffered. And even these mantles were covered with so much paint that they didn't see the carvings.
So when did they restore it?
The Pointers came in the early part of the 70s, like 1974. And that's when, by 1977, they started opening up the restaurant. It was downstairs. Eventually moved to this floor.
parlor.
There we go, the parlor. Yes. So, and this was the bar area when they first opened up. It was a beautiful long bar that went from that wall to this wall.
Why was it important for them to restore the mansion?
They actually, when they first bought it, they wanted it for an investment as a restaurant. They thought this
Again,
would
we're
be
talking real estate, right?
Real estate.
We got to tie it back into our podcast
Of
some way,
course,
somehow.
of
There we
course.
go.
And they looked at this and they go, oh, wow, that's that Lemp Mansion. They pulled up in front for an event. And so they got their way in here. And now it was still the boarding house when they were considering it. And every room was filled with someone, a transient person. Sometimes people would stay for a few months and so forth. And eventually they purchased it. And it wasn't a really big amount that they had to pay, but it was substantial. And they knew that they had a gold mine here. They did. So their goal was to open up that restaurant first, this floor restaurant. So they started in the basement, as I said, and they moved up and up and up. Now they're on the third floor. And I guess we could have a roof garden maybe, but that would be about the extent of it. So they were hard-working people. And the father, whose name was Dick Pointer, and his sons and his daughters, I'm sure, pitched in and did all the rehabbing up here.
Wow. So they did it themselves.
They did it themselves for
it.
the most part. They did have, people that were specialists in certain things. For instance, if you look up above us,
Oh,
there's
that's
this
really
beautiful,
pretty.
It's called fresco painting. And so they did have someone come in and refresh that because it had been covered with canvas for so long, because William Lemp had it, he asked someone to paint it, he didn't like it, so he covered it up, and then they found it. The Pointers did and went, oh my goodness, look at that. So it's been refreshed a couple times, but it's still the same as it was back then.
It is beautiful.
It is beautiful.
So backing up to kind of the spookiness of this whole thing, we've talked about 3 of the suicides. There was 4, and you said the other one took place upstairs?
Upstairs.
Nothing fun happened in this room or out of the ordinary? Just
Well, this room was the funerals for them. The caskets
There we go.
had been placed right there, and at least it started out with one of the younger boys who died rather suddenly in 1901.
in the house?
No, he died in
Okay.
California,
Oh,
actually. He had tuberculosis. So when they brought him back for burial, though, this is where he was. Then the next suicide was his father. He was laid to rest here, or at least the visitation, because he was such a popular man in St. Louis. And then Billy Lemp also, they used this room for his.
Where do you hear from most of the, it's a medium, communications. Where does most of that happen?
Anywhere. It's
Really,
no
anywhere,
particular
anytime?
place, anytime. I find it's a little bit quieter and a little easier sometimes to communicate on the 3rd floor because I can close myself off a little bit and just be up there by myself for a long period of time. As I said, though, it's getting more difficult because the Lemp Mansion is just getting more and more popular for people to stay here, especially in October.
When you say stay here, what do you mean by that?
There's 5 bed and breakfast rooms that you can stay.
Do people leave here freaked out?
In fact, I had a tour last night, and the lady we were in one of the rooms, and she said she had stayed in there with her husband, and they had such a terrifying experience in there. And my eyes were big as saucers listening to her story. And she said it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we just grabbed whatever we could, not even shoes. She didn't even put her shoes on, and they left. I don't begrudge anybody being a skeptic, though. You know, there's room for everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So
totally
if you think that even if you're a staunch one, you can still find something to enjoy about a tour or about talking to someone or just having a conversation. Because I run into that all the time, and I don't say, well, you're wrong and I'm right. That isn't it at all. I always tell people I am not the be-all and the end-all in the paranormal world. You know, I've done my research, I've done my homework, I've been doing it for years and years and years, so I feel confident in it, but, you know.
The story she told, have you heard that same story before?
Oh, no. Well, once.
Once?
I heard about this scream that they heard. They were laying in bed watching television, and something from the head of the bed came shooting out over their heads, a black form. And they were startled by it, and they didn't know what it was. And as they were gathering their stuff, whatever it was pushed her husband into a table. And and then it started screaming at them. But it was the loudest, like that they'd ever heard. They were terrified. Yikes. And so the other time I heard was one of the managers. He's been here since he was 14 years old because he's part of the Pointer family. And he and one of the other managers were leaving for the night, and they heard that same screech. And they didn't know exactly what to do. Should we go up? Should we
I would have
go
run
up?
just like they did.
So they went up, being good employees. They went up, and before they could get to where they thought it was coming from, it did it again. It was that scream. So yes, they did.
Just run.
They couldn't have done anything.
That's
There
the
was
sick
nobody
thing to
else
do.
in the house, you know.
So there are the shows on cable where they have paranormal, where they go in and do the readings, and I don't know what they're reading, energy. They've got these meters and this and that. Has anybody ever come in here?
Oh, all the time.
What do they find?
Any number of things. The first time when I was here, when I first started, the Travel Channel was here. That was the first one. And since then, I've been involved in so many different shows, from National Geographic to, you name it. They've been here. The Ghost Hunters, which was my favorite one.
Now, wait a minute. What's wrong with the Art of Custom podcast?
Oh, and the Custom podcast was the be-all. It was the best. Oh, the Ghost Hunters.
Yeah, the Ghost Hunters.
They were just so wonderful, and they found...
Were you here the whole time?
I was their contact person, so I got to walk around with them.
That's cool.
It was so cool. And we were all around, and I told them my stories, and they politely listened to me, kind of patting me on the head. And then they come back the next day, and they have their experience, and they were having a lot of things happen. Now, these guys always look for a logical explanation first.
Right.
If something happens, if it turns cold, if something's moving, why did it do it? And then they go for the paranormal aspect. So they had the same experience I did. They validated me. So when they showed me the video the next week, I was just like bouncing up and down in my
So
chair.
you've seen actual video proof that things are moving or whatever it is. And you've heard the audio?
I've heard the audio.
Did any of what you heard on the audio sound like maybe some of the voices who were talking to you?
Not really. The one time that I heard, I have an audio recording of my own, that during a radio broadcast here, it was a long time ago, it was their Halloween show, and we were on the 3rd floor, and there's a spirit on the 3rd floor by the name of Zeke. Now, Zeke is a little boy. He was a child that was challenged. He was born to William and his wife, Julia. Now, they were in their 50s and 60s when he was born. And in 1904, which is when I think he was born, that's pretty old, and especially with the prenatal care and all that. So he had so many challenges. He was deformed, they said. So the kids in the neighborhood saw him in the windows upstairs and called him names and so forth. And, he is one of the most tender-hearted spirits, that he's just a little boy looking for his mother. And his mother, Julia, even though she did not die of suicide, she is a spirit here. And she's looking for him.
Where did she pass, and where did Zeke
She passed almost in the same room that her husband committed suicide.
Oh, okay.
But she died of cancer. And that was in 1906. So he was 2 years old. And she continues to look for him. He lived here for at least 2 years when he was born until his mother died. And he was cared for by servants, and they cared for him very special. He was a special boy, and They loved him. He had one servant care for him. Her name was Sarah, and she remained a spirit here for a long time. Now, he died from a fall. This is a vagueness for me because I saw a fall, but I can't bring it into focus enough to see if he fell downstairs.
Here?
I think it was here.
Oh, okay.
Or down a ladder or something like that, or as the Elephant Man, if you remember that story, his head was so large and so was Zeke that he just laid down on a bed and he died. The Elephant Man did. It could have been that scenario. Did you hear that?
I did hear that.
Yes.
Yeah, there was something
They're
that's...
validating my story.
Yeah, it was almost like a creaky, but a very deliberate. You say spirits. How many spirits do we have in the Lemp
this house?
Mansion?
Well, it's always the world according to Betsy, you know. So,
Of course.
according to me, there are 9 identifiable spirits.
Okay.
And 5 of them are Lemp family members. 4 of them are not.
Okay, interesting. And you say a lot of that activity takes place on the 2nd and 3rd floors?
Yes, it's anywhere.
Anywhere?
Anywhere.
Melody, I promise, when I heard that large noise, I still to this day don't know what it was. It sounded like a crack, a pop, a bang, something. But, you know, my daughter was with us during the taping. She heard it. I saw her eyes go wide. My eyes went wide. Betsy, of course, is kind of used to it. And I know you heard it too.
Right.
Something did occur. But again, I don't know if it's something that's just normal, but it was just rather interesting that it happened while we were taping this interview with Betsy.
Well, and Betsy had given a few different theories about what happened to the child that lived in the home, and
Yeah.
it was the last theory. It just she said, "Oh, well, I guess I have my answer now," and I thought that was so cool. It sounded almost like if you could imagine a marble, but in between the walls.
Yeah, there you go. Marble.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It was-
so
yeah.
just kind of interesting. But from there, I remember, so we've kind of taken a tour of the main floor, and then we got a chance to go upstairs.
Right.
And the upstairs is just like you would imagine from this old, historic, renovated mansion, but only spookier.
You think so?
Yeah, I know so. Because remember, we walked up to the top of the stairs. Now, of course, it's Halloween, so they had it decorated. But there was this glowing head right at the top of the stairs, and and of course that's a little eerie as you start the tour of another area of the house where some violent endings took place.
There were. And, you know, one of the coolest rooms in the house, though, is the Lavender Ladies Suite.
It was gorgeous.
Yeah, and it was named for Lillian Lemp, who actually didn't live in that room. She said it was a playroom for the kids. So there's this gorgeous suite that is kind of dedicated to brides, and a lot of brides will get married in there because they have this immense bathroom with big clawfoot tub and a lot of room to get ready in.
And we built a lot of large homes, but to
Right.
see the size of this bathroom and the marble and the tub and the shower and everything, it was rather remarkable for a building that was built that long ago.
Well, and the Lavender Ladies Suite is a little bit different in that it does have what Betsy called residue, but it's not quite as dark as the rest of the home. And so she has some neat history to share with that too.
Well, this is the beautiful lavender suite.
I figured kind of by
The lavender.
bedspread
And the lavender walls. The walls. This is named in honor of Lily and the Lavender Lady. She never lived in this house, though, and she actually didn't like it much to be here. Her mother-in-law, Julia, really didn't have a lot of affection for her. They named this room in honor of her. It's the most popular bed and breakfast room. It's the biggest. It has a sitting room. It has this lovely bedroom, and then it has the bathroom to die for. So this room was the children's room. So there is a lot of what they call residue. It's like psychic residue or residual memory. It is a leftover, and it's like a tape of something being replayed, a loop of a tape, and it goes on and on and on and on. Now, it happens in all of our lives, but when it happens to us, maybe we're really excited, or God forbid, something violent happens, and we exude a whole lot of energy. There it is. Most of the time, just dissipates and goes away, but sometimes that loop catches. And so we hear things like if you watch a ghost show and they say every day there's a little girl turning cartwheels down our steps or something like that. If it happens that regularly, that precisely, it's probably just that residue, a sound, a sighting of someone. It happens in this house quite a bit. We'll hear children crying or laughing, and it sometimes comes in this area. We hear cats meowing and dogs barking, and the Lemps were avid outdoorsmen, but they loved their animals, as with Charles. Particularly Mrs. Lemp, Julia, she had an affection for cats, so we hear them. We even heard a cat last night. We heard one meowing. It's pretty wonderful, actually. I love it. I'm an animal lover, though. That's the best part.
So am I, for sure.
Serva and I are like that. We're buds. So
Do you communicate quite often?
with Serva?
With Serva?
Well, I do, yes, actually. Most tours.
How does that go?
Well, I do something called a dark room experience, and it's on the 3rd floor. It's a concentrated spirit communication, and it's done in almost all darkness, but there has to be some light or you won't see anything. So there we are in the room, we're all gathered, and I welcome the spirits to join us. And then I sit down, and everybody else has to stand during that part. And I asked Charles, can Serva join us? Can you come? Because they're always together, they have to be together. And we have a visit from her. She walks in the door, she comes right over to my knees here, and I can feel her. Now I have, sometimes it's harder for me to see apparitions, which would look just like us sitting here, a whole person. I see her more of a wraith, I call it. It's kind of a shadow or a mist. So when I stick my hand down into her, they can see me sticking my hand down, and then I'll move it like this, and it's like a stream. You can see her energy moving. And if she's welcomed by the people, by the tour people, she calls them, she'll go over there and have an encounter with them.
What if you have a non-believer? Does it affect that moment?
Not too much, because there's more believers than there are, at least open people than there are.
That's a great way to put it, open.
Yeah, than there are not complete non-believers, because there's different reasons why people come here. Sometimes it's because they want to do more, they want to find out more about ghosts, or it's Halloween season, or they just want a new experience or something fun to do, But there could be that somebody made them come with them, and they're dragging them here. So that could be the skeptic that's in the crowd. I think that this room is a bright room, bright colors and everything. So sometimes it is a more benign room. There isn't as much spirit activity, but that isn't necessarily always the case. Because people have told me stories about being in bed and having something sit on the bed with them. And
Right here?
Right here, right that same bed. It's okay. It's okay. I'm here.
You'll protect me.
It's funny because I used to be the most frightened person in the world. Like when I'd start my tour in the very beginning, those 20 some odd years ago, I would open the back door. I'm giving away a secret here. I would open the back door, and then I'd go real fast to the front door, and I'd open that, and so they'd both be open. So if I had to make a quick getaway, I could do it. And then I'm okay. I can be here by myself.
But see, we're in the middle of the daylight. Nothing's going to happen during the day, right?
That's not necessarily true.
All right, well, let's go across the hall. I see the pocket doors, but you've got 2 bedrooms here.
Well, that's because it was William and Julia's bedrooms. Now, if you've ever been to some really wealthy people's home, well, you have in your business, but in olden times,
Right.
A lot of times they didn't share a bedroom. Look, go to Abraham Lincoln's house. He has a bedroom, Mary has a bedroom. So it's the same here. Or maybe he snored or something. So this was William's bedroom, and that was her bedroom.
Okay.
That pocket door is interesting. Now, I have heard, and I kind of found out the facts on it, that for every hinged door you had, whether it be a closet or a bathroom or a room, that you were charged a room tax for it. So they put those, that's why there's so many pocket doors.
There's no hinges.
Heard that. And there's no closets in this room at all. They use these big pieces of furniture. And in fact, these are pretty modern, but the same thing was used. Yeah. William was the first suicide in the family, and it's pretty tragic. 1904.
Okay.
It all started in 1901, though, and I had mentioned that his son Frederick had died of tuberculosis, but Frederick was his favorite son. He was the one that he had pinned all of his hopes on. He wanted him to be the successor as the president of the brewery, even though he was a younger son. Now, Billy, that was his sadness, because his father, when he was deciding to retire, told Billy, well, you can't handle it. I'm going to give the job to Frederick. And that just hurt Billy so much. But Frederick got sick, and they sent him to California. They weren't sure what it was, but the climate in Pasadena is better than St. Louis, so they sent him out there, and he was doing pretty good. They got reports back and forth, but William and Julia, and particularly William, was beside himself with worry. He wanted to see his boy. So he made the train trip out there. He was doing better, Frederick was. He lived there with his wife and their little infant daughter. So he came back to St. Louis to plan this big celebration for Frederick's return. Now it's getting to be Christmas time, and it's 1901. It was December 12th. And Julia, the mother, had gone out Christmas shopping early in the morning, and William was in the library reading a book, and the servants were decorating the house for Christmas. And a knock comes to the front door, and there's a man there with a telegram, and the telegram says that his son Frederick had died, and he had died very suddenly of an aneurysm of his heart due to his disease. The mother comes home, Julia, with the daughters, and they look up on the porch. Now, William Lemp was a very short man, but he was a powerhouse. You've got to know that. But he was collapsed on the porch in a chair, bent over, and it was snowing, and the snow was piling on top of him, and he had no coat or hat or gloves, and they panicked. They ran up to him. What is it? What is it? And he holds this. Oh, this is sad. He holds this paper up, and he goes, my boy is dead. And from that moment on, he gave up. He didn't want to live. He had a business to run. He was part of the board of directors for the St. Louis World's Fair of '04. He barely did that. In fact, he quit that. And so the years went by just a little bit more. So in January 1st of 1904, his best friend died. His best friend had been his childhood friend, and when Adam, his father, had sent for William to come from Germany, he came with this friend, and this friend's name was Frederick Pabst, of Pabst Blue Ribbon. Yes. Oh, wow. And in fact, he started that dynasty. And so they were best friends until the end. So a little bit time went by, February, and William had spent most of his time then not at work. He used to know all of his employees by name and their families and their stories, and he paid them in cash, so he'd hand them their wages and so forth. But he quit doing that, and everyone was so worried because he was so erratic. So on the morning of his suicide, he and Julia went down and had breakfast together, which was their pattern. She went out to do the fresh marketing, which she did every morning. He came back up here because he told her that he wasn't feeling very well. I'm going to go lay down. He came up here, he locked both of the doors. His bed was against that wall, and he got a gun from his dresser, and he fired one single shot into his head. It was a loud noise, but it was muffled, and the servants were the only people here. They came rushing up here and said, Mr. Lemp, are you okay? Mr. Lemp, are you okay? And there was no answer. So they ran to the phone, got his sons here. Now they're pounding on the door. Father, let us in. And the door burst open, and there he was laying there. But he was also still alive. He lingered long enough for Julia to be found at the market and to cradle him in her arms. And then he died. And that was on February 13th, 1904, and she died in 1906 of cancer. Wow. And he's not a spirit here. I have a theory that sometimes the earthbound spirits come from that fact of a suicide or a murder or even a sudden car accident or, a death of a child. They're stuck. But in this case, I think that his son Frederick was here and helped him in that transition. But as I told you, she remains here for Zeke. She's looking for him.
Is there one spirit that has more of a presence?
I would think Charles, and then next Billy. Billy is, he likes ladies. So sometimes a woman will feel someone standing right in front of him, or standing at her side, okay, and she's just like, what is that feeling I'm feeling? And he's just looking at you like, ooh, I kind of like you, that. And Charles is just there because he's walking around all the time, and he makes his presence known to whoever will notice him. He likes it. We were doing the dark room. We couldn't get up in the upstairs, so we were doing it in the vault. And there's iron doors. So the big vault door I closed, and then there's two little ones. And we're all standing there, we're doing it, and all of a sudden the one goes, opens. And poor Michelle, my assistant, jumped like 3 feet. Oh my! She said a bad word, even and then it happened again, and it opened even more. So somebody was getting our attention. There's a lot of cats that will come out and they'll rub on your ankles like a cat will do, or I call it making bread on your toes, kneading your bread, kneading your toes and stuff like that. So there's so many pictures of these cats. Wow. They can manifest in just big green eyes or tiny little green specks that you're seeing. You go, oh, well, that's a cat. So that the cats are pretty wonderful. But the dogs are too. There's a little yappy dog too. I call her Winnie. I don't know if that's her name. I just call her that because that's.
She lived in the house?
I think she lived maybe during that boarding house time, but I'm not sure. And she's a little yapper, that kind of dog. And I've only heard her, but I've got pictures of her that other people have taken. So it's great.
This has been great. Thank you so much.
If anybody wants to get a hold of me, they need to call me directly for a tour. Now, if you've got Lemp Mansion questions, you can call them.
Do you have your...
And if anybody has any questions or they just want to talk about this, tell them to call me. I always love to talk to people. Thank you so much.
Melody, I thought it was very interesting because one of the things that I noticed is the suites. There were a couple of suites. The lavender suite was one of them. Across the hall was another one. These rooms are very large, and they actually were divided by tall, big, solid pocket doors. And we asked Betsy about that, and she had, kind of an interesting answer.
She did. She said, well, it could have been taxes for the number of hinges.
Of hinges, which I had never heard of that. They would actually base your taxes on the number of doors or the number of hinges. And of course, pocket doors don't have hinges.
Well, and one of the things that I thought maybe in 1911, the Lemps did remodel the home to turn it into offices. And so with that 1911 remodel, if you think about those pocket doors, and you use them in, office buildings even now.
We do.
You can slide them back and forth and create a big conference space or close it up. So I wonder if maybe that had something to do with it too. And I wasn't there for the remodel though.
You weren't there in 1911?
No, maybe we should ask William.
Speaking of pocket doors, since this is the Art of Custom podcast, I have to sneak in. A lot of our clients want to put pocket doors in their house. Now, I'm a fan of pocket doors because I think if used in the right application, they're space savers and you don't have to worry about the door swings and everything else. But I will tell you, the one thing I appreciated about those pocket doors, they were solid wood, which I would also tell our clients because those aren't going to warp. But then the other thing is make sure if you are putting pocket doors in your beautiful home, you use really good pocket door hardware, the tracks that they go in, because a lot of times the frames are cheap and the pocket doors just won't work very well. So I know I kind of got away from our eerie podcast going on, but I wanted to be able to add a little bit of an educational flair to it as well.
Well, I felt like the size of the pocket doors also just kind of added to that feeling.
They were huge.
They were
What do you think they were?
ceilings.
10 feet?
Oh, at least.
Maybe 12? Yeah, it was crazy.
On a second floor, too.
Yeah.
So that was gorgeous. It really did add to the grandeur of the room with all of the carvings. And what a gorgeous home.
It was a lot of fun. I'm a believer that there are spirits. Now, you're probably going to have people listening to this who think I'm crazy, but I truly believe everybody can kind of have their own opinion. It's one of those things that when you're in that environment, I don't know whether you've prepped yourself before you go in to kind of feel it, and so you're experiencing maybe some things that really aren't there, but I don't know. I just felt unusual inside that mansion.
It's this weird feeling as if you're a part of history.
There you
Not
go.
that you're stepping back into history. Like I've been in, historic homes before. It feels like you're part of this, like, living, breathing kind of piece of history. It's really a different feeling that comes over you. I love how Betsy said people are open to the idea of spirits.
I liked that. That was really good. And I would agree I'm open to the idea. I don't know that I'm a believer, but I'm open. That's such a great way to put it. And she was so interesting because we would talk to her about, how she is communicated with and what she feels and hears and sees and everything else. But I'm so interested in this that I really would like to go back and either check out, some of the coverage that has been on either Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures or CNN Travels. I'm truly going to go back and look that up. I encourage our listeners to do the same thing because it's such a cool structure. South St. Louis, Lemp Mansion. Check it out. I mean, it's the season to be entertained and spooked a little bit, right?
Absolutely. And Stephen Walker wrote, it's called Lemp the Haunting History. If you want to read up on it, you can see photos of the home and read stories about the individuals that lived in the home. And one of the things that I loved about Betsy's the way she talked about it is she talked about the people who lived there and not just the ghost stories. And you really get a sense of, okay, what the Lemp family, kind of was like. And we have so many cool beer barons around here in St.
We really
Louis.
do.
So, and, the ties with the Pabst family. And
was very interesting.
Yeah, with the Bushes. There's some really cool stories. And Edwin Lemp, he was a huge supporter of, we have one of the best zoos in the country here.
Free, may I add that it's free as well?
Which
That's
is
incredible.
insane,
Yeah.
right? He is actually part of the reason that we got our first 2 African lions and helped design the bird menagerie there. And he was the youngest Lemp, and he had basically a zoo on his property right outside of downtown St. Louis in Kirkwood, Missouri. So there are a lot of little other homes around here in the suburbs in St. Louis that have those really cool stories tied into history.
I just realized that there is definitely a downside to building a new home, building a custom home.
Oh, you can't say that.
There is.
No.
There's no history. There's no ghosts. There's nothing.
You know what? What I love about
Create your own ghost.
Well, but what I love about the custom building process is you get to select all of these cool nooks and crannies.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, you can pull in the pocket doors. You can, add the really cool moldings and things like that. And you could do it, if you start semi-custom with a plan too, but we built a modern farmhouse out in Wildwood for the Chorzell family. And they had, the window seats, and it just had that.
And a lot of the reclaimed and repurposed wood flooring and stair rails and newel posts and things like that. So you're right. You're absolutely right. But, hopefully we didn't stray too far with this episode of The Art of Custom. It just seemed like such a fun episode. When you came to me and started explaining the idea, it didn't take me long to say I'm in because I love Halloween, love ghost stories, love the history of St. Louis. There's some beautiful mansions. The Lemp Mansion happens to be one of them. Interesting thing is when talking with Betsy, people actually can book an overnight stay there. And she says many times, though, people come running out and will not finish their stay because something they hear or see or they're just too scared.
Well, I'm actually going to link to the Lemp Mansion's website in our show notes. So if you're coming through St. Louis or if you live in St. Louis, you can spend some time with Betsy too. I mean, how fun would that be? She's so cool.
She is, and I know she gives tours every Monday, and I also know they have a special chicken dinner that she's a part of every Sunday. Yeah, I mean, if you're in the St. Louis area ever, just kind of look up the Lemp Mansion. I think it'd be kind of a fun stop. And we mentioned the zoo. The zoo's an awesome place. We have the largest park in the United States with Forest Park.
Right.
So there's a lot to do in the St. Louis area. So what did we miss? Anything?
I do want to say that if you guys liked this format, kind of hearing the stories about houses and all of that, let us know your feedback. If, maybe we can do some more fun home stories that stray off the beaten path.
One I'm going to throw out in the mix right now, and maybe people could respond to, is that in Utah, of course, there's a lot of old abandoned coal mines and gold mines and everything else.
Yes.
And there's an individual out there who is an expert at all of that. And I've heard him talk about some of these abandoned mines, and I keep thinking maybe that would be a fun podcast. We're building in Utah. We like to stray off the beaten path occasionally. Maybe we should talk about some of that cool history too. So something to think about.
Right. And I do believe that some of the, Utah's a big center for modern architecture.
Yes, it is.
So, there's a lot of really cool home stories to be told out there as well. So, give us a call at 314-266-9709 or shoot us an email. We would love to hear your feedback and leave us a review if you dare.
And coming up on our second bonus episode of the season. See, we normally do 10 episodes. This was 11. We actually have a 12th one coming up. What's that one going to focus on?
We are going to talk to Zach Smythe, who is known around the world, actually, for his unique container home. He's been featured on a couple of Netflix specials, and he's going to come in and talk to us about making your home unique.
And more people are doing that with container homes. So mark your calendar. We will be coming out with that episode before long. And thank you so much for participating in the Haunting of Lemp Mansion episode that we just brought you. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and we look forward to having you join us again on our next episode of The Art of Custom.
For more information, visit www.artofcustompodcast.com or find us on Facebook as The Art of Custom and on Twitter at Art of Custom Pod. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts to get the latest episodes, and please rate and review to help us grow. The Art of Custom is produced by Hug Monster Sound with original music by Adam Frick Verdine. Thanks for listening.